Hello, and welcome to the Product Insiders LinkedIn Live series, in which we interview product leaders and learn how they leverage customer insights to navigate tough product decisions. I'm your host, Zach Lyons, managing partner of Agile Innovation Advisors. And if you're joining us live today, can you please enter where you are from in the chat so we know who is with us? And today, our special guest is Larry McDonough, most recently Director of Product Management at Procore Technologies. Although Larry has an extensive history of working in product management going back to the mid-90s, and he's worked at a number of companies over the years. Today, though, we'll be asking Larry some questions about some of his most recent experience. If you have any specific questions for Larry, please enter them in the chat, and then we'll get to them in a bit. So with that, let's begin. So Larry, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. What I would like to do is the first question to ask you is just thinking about a tough product decision you've had to navigate. Can you please tell us a little bit about your role at the time and what that situation was?
Absolutely, Zach. It's great to be here. Yeah, so I've been in product management, like you said, a long time, and there's many different situations I've been in with many different companies where we've had very challenging decisions to make and tough calls, and perhaps even not sure which way to go. Right. So customer input has always been really helpful in guiding us for what we should do. And thinking about a recent challenge that we had, this was at Procore. What I did there is I was the director of product management for our ecosystem division, and was responsible for, everything having to do with making or enabling our third-party partners to be successful. So this included things like the marketplace, our third-party app marketplace, our app APIs. So the actual method by which developers build integrations and work with and interact with Procore, and also the whole developer experience. So the web portal and everything related to onboarding as a partner or developer. So me and my team were responsible for these things. I would say there was one additional one that was always a little more challenging and often presented the most interesting problems. And this is, we also were responsible, because it was the ecosystem, for the experience of our customers with our third-party solutions, right? So the customers are using these third-party solutions, and whether they're successful or not, in part depends on how well we built our platform. So
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. So what would you say was the challenge or issue? Obviously, there's probably many challenges and issues, but what would you say maybe is the most difficult challenge or issue that you were trying to overcome? And maybe what was difficult about that decision?
yeah, I'd say one of the biggest ones was, as with any SaaS solution, you're always trying to increase engagement and keep your users using your application more and more. And in fact, it's often a measure of whether you're successful or not, how well they're using it. So we were having an issue that we just weren't getting as much engagement as we wanted. Like, we had set certain levels and we were getting really good engagement. I think it was respectable, but we wanted more. So we're curious, what perhaps could enable that. And so that's kind of the problem statement going in, which, we want to increase user engagement with the underlying platform. So, what's holding back, getting to that next level?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So what did you do? Like, what kind of insights did you gather that maybe helped you increase engagement?
Yeah. So what's cool about, Procore and many tech companies I work with, many of them will have an internal team that can help you kind of reach out to customers. Some don't, in which case, they can find, experts like yourself that can do this. We had an internal team that helped us. So we employed that team to conduct some interviews, and which the product management team observed. We actually helped put together the interview questions, or at least reviewed them. But the professionals actually know how to construct these questions so there's no bias, and you're not leading someone towards an actual answer you hope that they get. So we did a lot of that. We also had a survey that we mailed out to all of our, big chunk of our customer base. And we also conducted, just, personal conversations with many of the customers and partners and developers that we have relationships with through our business. So we're kind of assembling all of that. Oh, there was a fourth one too, is that the company itself had a place for customers to submit ideas or suggestions or highlight problems, just on a generic website as part of Procore. They could just go to and input their comments about, just general product feedback. And some of those would get filtered to us that were relevant to what we were doing. So we looked at those, we looked at the specific research we did, and we compiled all this results. And I know the specific thing you were asking us about really had to do with engagement and switching time. So what we found is, and this is where the real problem lies, and this is the one we were trying to solve, was that the kind of integrations that we enabled kind of made it not as easy as it could be for customers to, use Procore and then use the integration, then use Procore and use the integration. They were kind of going back and forth. So that was a loss of productivity when you have to kind of mentally, shift your brain from one context to another. So that was the problem we were, zeroing in on, and then, looking for a solution after we understood the problem to how to solve that.
Did customers ask you or tell you anything about what switching back and forth, having to go back and forth? Did that create any kind of a?
It wasn't. Some customers mentioned it directly. Other customers, we would ask them to describe how they use the product and, kind of where they were experiencing, if anything, any sort of friction, or would like things to move more smoothly. So sometimes we could derive that, oh, that's the same problem another customer had, but perhaps the other customer was more articulate at actually identifying what the real thing was, whereas this customer's, has the same sort of issues, but didn't identify the real core problem. So I think that's one of the key things about customer research is, you have to really look for the problem that's underlying the symptoms or the solutions or the workflow friction that they're experiencing, right? So if you're looking for that problem and you can see a common theme across many customers, then you're on to something.
Good point. Yeah, customers will often say like they just want this thing easier to use or a little more reliable or robust or whatever, but really what's underlying that, right? What's behind that is what the key is.
Yeah, and I think that's what's real important is we even had a solution in mind long before this, because there had been some, cool, innovative people that have come up with some solutions, and we were working really hard to not like inject our solution into the understanding the problem, right? Because you've got to understand the problem first. If you don't, and you sort of push a solution that you think is solving the problem, and if it's not, you might solve some symptoms, but you're not going to solve the real problem, right? So that's kind of how things happened on our end. We had a solution due to some innovation internally that we thought would solve this problem, but we wanted to validate that the problem was the real problem.
Sure. Interesting. So what was the results? Like, what did you guys end up doing?
Well, after all the user research and customer conversations and the survey, it was clear that this kind of switching cost and a lack of context was a big issue. There were other issues we learned about. When you go out to customers, you'll identify, half a dozen core things that you might need to work on, right? And you can kind of prioritize those. But this was a big priority one for us that we knew would have a big impact on our customers. So what we did after that, we identified the core problem, is we went out to a few with some mock-ups and tried to storyboard a solution for them just to see if this looked like it would work and would resonate. Some of the closest, customers that we had that we knew would really give us some honest feedback. That came back really positive. So we moved forward to build a pilot.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
And then did you go beyond the pilot, or did it?
Oh yeah. Okay. It's been released actually. So this past Groundbreak in October, this is our big annual show at Procore, we announced Side Panel. And what it is it's you can kind of think of it, it's not a new concept, but it was new for us, all right, but it's certainly been done before. And the idea is that you have a window alongside of your core application, kind of like a add-in, Microsoft add-ins, or could be Google Chrome extensions, that kind of thing. And you could select those things and then activate them right on the screen. So third-party apps could be living right next to Procore apps on the same screen, and you could, interact with each and get, contextual information back and forth. And this was a big change between the other style of interaction we had, which was either they overlaid the whole screen with the third-party integration, but that screen didn't know about the context of where the user was. So that's where that switching cost came from. The other type of integration we had was just a data connection in the background that was headless, and that's still extremely valuable. But the problem we were seeing was when the human users were kind of trying to leverage an integration and work with Procore at the same time.
Huh. That's super interesting. Have you heard any feedback from customers about?
Oh yeah, it was huge. It was really big. The launch we did at Groundbreak was mostly kind of have two launches. The first one was to our partners and our developers, so they could really start to leverage and use the integration mode first. And then, we got more activities planned to share this with customers. But certainly a lot of customers know about it because it's been publicly announced.
Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting, basically really trying to be purposeful in the research and understand the customer problem, even though you already had a solution in mind, kind of holding that back to really understand what the customer.
We were being really open, like this might not be the right solution. Let's keep all of our options open.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real lesson, with any type of problem you're pursuing is, first you have a hypothesis that you think you know what it is, right? The trick then is to not bias your questions to, answer your hypothesis, right? So I think that's where it can get tricky when you go out to, look at research. So as long as you do that correctly and you identify the real problem and are honest that it's not, you're just trying to find justification for the solution you have, and you find that real problem, then you're going to be set up well.
Oh, well said. So, and for people who might be listening, I'm curious, you mentioned you might find 5 or 6 issues. Did you have a good way to prioritize those issues you found?
Yeah, it was customer impact. We prioritized by what we thought would be the most impactful for the customer. There also was, let me think, there were some that were just more feasible than others. If you think of Marty Kagan's, 4 kind of things: valuable, usable, feasible, viable, right? So, there were some problems that really features or changes that were, really highlight, customer value. Some that would be a little more, take a lot longer to build, right? So something like that might need some architecture work first. So we kind of prioritize things based on that. But they were all, problems that were, or less, I wouldn't say problems. They were elements of the solution we currently had that could stand some improvement. And, with software, you always have areas you can improve. No software app is ever completely done, right? So,
sure, right.
you're constantly refreshing and building it all the time. So that's kind of where we were.
And my last question for you, and we do actually have a question from a listener, but I'll ask you my last question, which is, just I like asking this question, kind of looking back, right, doing a retrospect. What would you do differently, if anything? Like if you could do that again, would you?
Yeah, it's always a good question. And, whenever I think about that question, I realize and remind myself that, you never know what would have happened with the choices you didn't take, right? So you make a decision, you go this way, you go down path A, right? You can later say, I wish I went down path B. But if you're honest with yourself, no matter which path you go down, there's always things that happen you don't necessarily foresee, right? So you don't know what you would have happened if you went down path B. So I think given all the information we had, we made the right decision. But if I were to had the ability to kind of sort of A/B test, 2 different things, one of the challenges and difficult decisions we had to make kind of midstream was this type of product has 2 customers: an internal customer kind of people building integrations or building additive stuff inside of our own product teams. And then there was a third-party solutions, right? We decided to make sure that we could satisfy all of our internal product requirements before we, when finally released for external. And looking back, I wonder if, by doing that, we because of issues we ran into, complications, and product teams weren't always ready to move as fast as we wanted. We might have actually not gotten to the customer value as soon as we could have if we went the other way. Now, if we did go and just do third party first, and said, we'll deal with the internal problems later, who knows if there would have been other challenges. But there's kind of pros and cons going both ways, and we had two customer personas to satisfy, and ultimately we wanted to satisfy them both. But it was like, do we go internal then external, or do you go external and then internal? So we decided to go internal first, and I think we ran into some snags and delays a little bit. So I sometimes I wonder if it would have been different if we went the other way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Right. And a lot of products obviously have more than one, right? Customer,
right? Yeah.
Constituent. And so how do you balance that? Always a tough challenge. So I do have a question here from Spencer, and I'll put that up on the screen. I can read it, or maybe you can read it, but take a moment to look at it.
Request. Do you suggest this as a good alignment tactic for more holistic feedback? Absolutely. Yeah, I think anytime you have an internal team that's working directly with customers, getting that feedback is critical for product managers. Yeah, absolutely. So one way we did that at Procore is we worked closely with, or a sister team of mine worked closely with gathering all that feedback and getting it into that customer system. So remember I told you that, customers can hit a website externally and put ideas. So we actually had an internal team that would get some of that feedback, collect it, put it in there too. So that way it came through one of the channels we were already familiar gathering data from. But any mechanism you can use to capture that input and feedback is really important.
And Spencer's mentioning that this pod idea, right, where you have folks from different functional areas in the business sort of assigned to a group. I don't know if that actually helps with getting the feedback or actually developing a solution to the feedback, perhaps. But do you recall?
Well, I think it helps you. It helps you understand the problem more holistically, right? Because sales team going to look at a certain situation, or friction with the customer, or friction getting something fully in market. Same with marketing and product. So there's three different optimization functions, if you will, trying to all be satisfied at the same time. So I think having that holistic understanding of your product and how it's used and how it's sold and how it's marketed is critical, right? Because it may not, drive you directly to a decision, or decision directly, but what it can do is help you understand the problem better and make you step back and go, oh, yes, it looks like we'll deliver customer value this way, but sales is telling us this is going to be really hard to sell, right? Mm-hmm. So then you got to sit back and think, okay, well, how do we help that? How do we make that simpler, right? So it opens up new channels of dialogue.
Good point. Yeah. The more people you have focused on the problem, right, the more they can give different perspectives and hopefully get to a better answer, right, than just individual. So that's a good
absolutely. Good question.
So that's I think that's the only question we have that came in. So we can wrap up with that. So thank you, Larry, so much. It's really interesting story. I love sharing the personal examples, what happened to you, the decisions you made. It's just a perfect example. And so we hope everyone who's listening or will listen in the future that you take away at least one new thing, right, from the conversation. We can continue the discussion by entering your comments or questions in the chat. They'll remain there. We will get those, and we can continue having that discussion later. And so for all of you who have tuned in, please stay tuned for our next Product Insiders event. Again, right here on LinkedIn. We have something scheduled for next week. But until that time, I'm your host, Zach Lyons with Agile Innovation Advisors. And take care. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.